Game of Thrones is a fantasy drama series, based off the Song of Ice and Fire novels by author George R.R. Martin. While the series contains many plot points from the books, as it progressed, it deviated more and more from the source material. However, the question remains, is the Game of Thrones TV series better than the books? No. Alright, this obviously isn't going to be a straight show versus book comparison. The Song of Ice and Fire novels blow the show out of the water, and I'm hardly the first person to notice that. But while the terrible final seasons of the show have completely dominated every discussion of the series, I thought I would take a different approach. Today, I'm going to be discussing what I think the show does better than the novels. After all, if you only pay attention to what's being said about the show now, you might forget that this series was ever good to begin with. And it really was good at one time. Now don't get me wrong, I love the books. I've read all of them, and I've spent more time on the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit than I'd care to admit. I could talk about theories from the books for hours, and with the recent announcement of a prequel series titled House of the Dragon, I thought this would be the perfect time to look back on what the show did well, and hopefully, the new show will be able to emulate some of these moments. After all, the show was my first exposure to the series. In fact, I only started reading the books because I couldn't stand to wait for the next season. That's how much the show hooked me. And despite how badly it ended, I can't help but be grateful for a series that provided me with so much enjoyment over the years. So, in honor of the seven-faced god, here are 7 things I think the show did better than the books. Number 7. The music. Alright, this one might be cheating. Of course, a medium that includes sound is going to do music better than a written book. But the soundtrack in the show is not only amazing, it also expands upon the material we got in the books. Now, I'm not just talking about Ramin Djawadi's incredible score, which will go down as one of the best in all of fantasy. I'm also talking about the actual songs that the characters sing in the world of the show. The most obvious, and perhaps a little overdone example, is The Reigns of Castamere. This ominous song about the Lannisters destroying their enemies is given to us in the books, but the version performed by The National is just so incredible, I can't help but think of it whenever I read the lyrics. The haunting chill of his voice just sends shivers down my spine, as it does with Catelyn whenever she hears the song at the Red Wedding. Another great example is Jenny's song. In the books, we only get a single line from the song, but in Season 8 of the show, Podrick actually sings the complete version. Even though they made up the lyrics, I think they did a wonderful job following the motif of the song from the books. In the books, the song is a sad memory of a happier time, and the show's version fits that perfectly. It's also one of the only good points from that season. The Bear and the Maiden Fair is sung a few times in the show. In this scene, it's actually sung by Gary Lightbody, the lead singer of Snow Patrol. We'd also get a rock and roll cover by the Hold Steady, which, while it doesn't sound like anything from the show, it comes right after Jaime gets his hand chopped off, which only adds to the shock of that scene. Now, I could go on and on about more songs like Light of the Seven or The Dornishman's Wife, but I think you get the point. Music has always been one of the highlights of the series, and I hope we get more of it in the House of the Dragon. Number 6. ARYA and TYWIN. In Season 2, ARYA, disguised as a commoner, is captured by the Lannisters' men and taken to Harrenhal. After impressing Tywin Lannister with her wit, he takes her for his cupbearer. We then get quite a few scenes of them interacting over the course of the season. They form a kind of friendship, despite the fact that Tywin is currently waging a war against her brother. This is one of the few times in the series that Tywin is actually humanized. Normally, we only see him with scenes with his children, whom he's usually disappointed with. However, with ARYA, whom he has no vested interest in, we get an almost warm, paternal side of him that we haven't seen before. She is in some ways the type of daughter he always wanted. Headstrong, resourceful, and utterly devoted to her family. In the books, things happen a little differently. She is captured, but by Vargo Hoat, the leader of a company of sellswords working for the Lannisters. She never interacts directly with Tywin, and in fact quite stupidly misses the chance to have him killed by Jaqen H'ghar. In the show at least, this can be explained by them having some kind of a relationship. Later, when Tywin leaves with most of his men, she helps stage a rebellion against the remaining Lannisters. However, I found this sequence a little pointless, because the sellswords were already going to betray the Lannisters for Roose Bolton, who then takes control of the castle. Arya then serves as Roose's cupbearer, but they don't really form any kind of a relationship. In fact, despite the fact that Roose serves her brother, she doesn't reveal her identity to him. Which sounds stupid, but it actually is pretty believable when you get to my next point. Number 5. Roose Bolton's appearance. The Song of Ice and Fire series has always been praised for its realism and nuanced depictions of characters. George has repeatedly stated that the good guys don't always wear white, and the bad guys don't always wear black. Life is more complicated than that, and he doesn't want to paint good and evil in the traditional light. Which sounds well and good, until we get to Roose Bolton. In the books, Roose is basically a vampire. He's known as the Leech Lord because he uses leeches to constantly drain the blood from his body. Because of this, he's extremely pasty and pale, and his eyes are so cold they're described as shards of ice. He also wears a pink cloak spotted with blood, and his armor is adorned with human heads screaming in agony. Is it really a surprise then when a guy like this turns out to be evil? No wonder Arya didn't feel comfortable telling him who he was. He looks like something out of Pan's Labyrinth. I much prefer Roose's look in the show. He just seems like an average middle-aged dude, someone you wouldn't look twice at. His unremarkable appearance is a great mask for the cold psychopathy underneath, and it makes it much more believable that Robb would trust this guy. Roose is also much more humanized in the show. In the books, not only does he betray Robb at the Red Wedding, he also actively leads the Northern Army into a trap so that they can't be used against him later. He also doesn't care what happens to his wife and newborn child after he's dead, and would happily let Ramsay murder them. Now, of course, Roose is ruined by later seasons of the show, and he's hardly the only victim of bad writing. But while he was on the stage, I found him to be a believable and compelling villain.
Here's to the young wolf!
Oh, forever young.
Number 4. General Dialogue. Now, I'll be the first to admit, a lot of dialogue is worse in the show than in the books. For example, the Broken Man's speech in A Feast for Crows is one of the most beautiful pieces of language, not only in this series, but also all of literature. Yet instead, we get a mediocre facsimile delivered by a horribly underutilized Ian McShane, who they couldn't even bother to give the proper character name. Fuck you, D&D. But there are some cases where I do think they tightened up the dialogue and made it sound more cinematic. For example, in the Season 1 finale Fire and Blood, we get this bit of dialogue from Great John Umber.
It was the dragons we bowed to, and now the dragons are dead.
In the books, he says that they wed the dragons, not bowed to them. Which doesn't make sense, since Torrhen Stark did famously kneel to Aegon the Conqueror, and the fact that the Starks never married into the Targaryens is a major piece of background lore from the books. Another example is the scene with Catelyn when she talks to Jaime about what happened to Bran. In the books, when he tells her he pushed her out the window, she stoically guards her feelings. While in the show, her voice breaks when she asks him why he tried to kill her son.
How did he come to fall from that tower?
I pushed him out the window.
Why?
I like Catelyn a lot more in the show than the books in general, which is not to say that I don't like Catelyn at all in the books. In fact, I think she's one of the most underrated characters of the series. However, the show really makes a point of exploring her feelings, especially of Jon Snow, and Michelle Fairley's performance is wonderful. The last example I'll give is a small one, but one I really enjoy. In the books, there's a saying about the relationship between the king and the king's hand. They say that the king eats and the hand takes the shit, which is funny enough, I guess, but I think the show's version is much more succinct.
What's the line? The king shits and the hand wipes.
Number 3. Language. The world of Ice and Fire is home to many different peoples, each with their own unique tongues. Though the main events primarily take place in a stand-in for medieval England with the common tongue that all the main characters speak, across the world we get to see many different cultures with their own languages and dialects. However, in the books, we only get a hint of what those languages sound like. Though George, like all fantasy writers, draws inspiration from Tolkien, unlike Tolkien, he's not a linguist. Therefore, we only get the occasional word of Dothraki or Valyrian, such as the famous Valar Morghulis. And when characters speak in these tongues, it's either translated or not understood. However, the show went the extra mile and hired an actual linguist, David J. Peterson, to create real and usable languages for the show. He took the fragments we see in the books and built an actual working language that would fit the culture. When you hear a character speaking Dothraki, that's not just nonsense that they're spouting. It's a real language with grammar, syntax, and all the other boring stuff that you learned about in your English classes. In fact, Dothraki and Valyrian are available to learn just like any other language. In fact, Valyrian is available on Duolingo, and over 1 million people have signed up to learn it. Now, I'd make fun of these people for wasting their time learning a fake language with no practical use in the real world, but I literally read over 1 million words of a fake version of the War of the Roses, so who am I to talk shit? Number 2. SHAE. Of all the characters that got expanded on in the series, SHAE is probably the best. In the books, she really is just a whore. Her feelings for Tyrion are just an act that he pays for. And the thing is, he knows this. He knows she's just with him for the money, but he's so lonely and desperate for love, he allows himself to believe that he means more to her than he really does. It's a great bit of character development for Tyrion. However, in the show, instead of this, we actually get more development for SHAE herself. In this version, she actually does fall in love with Tyrion. They develop a very close bond, which is why his marriage to Sansa and eventual breakup with her hurts her so much. In the books, she testifies against him simply because Cersei bribed her. In the show, though, she feels betrayed by him and does this out of scorn. It just adds another element to their relationship. And this, of course, leads me into my final improvement from the show. Number 1. Tyrion's storyline in Season 4. This has to be one of the best changes they made in the show. I really prefer the sequence of events in Season 4 compared to A Storm of Swords. In the books, when Tyrion meets with Prince Oberyn for the first time, he tells the story about visiting Tyrion as a baby right then and there. I think it has much more dramatic impact when they have a conversation in the show the night before his trial by combat. Not only do we get the sad tragedy of Tyrion's life, but we also get more development for Oberyn in that moment. It results in this really emotional and dramatic scene when he offers to be Tyrion's champion in order to avenge his sister. Speaking of the trial, I also think the sequence of events here is better than in the books. In the books, Oberyn agrees to be Tyrion's champion before he has his breakdown and demands a trial by combat. I really liked it in the show. Tyrion doesn't have a champion when this happens. Instead, he's so mad at SHAE's testimony, he just lashes out and acts without thinking. It also makes it much more dramatic when Bronn refuses to fight for him, and Tyrion is left thinking he'll have to fight the mountain by himself. Another slight change I like is Tyrion's conversation with TYWIN about Casterly Rock. Now technically this happens in Season 3, which is also based on A Storm of Swords, but the dialogue in this scene is just incredible, and it's a little more punchy than what we get in the book. Now, of course, I hate the fact that they left out the Tysha storyline when Jaime helps Tyrion escape. And of course, Tyrion would get ruined in the following seasons. But for this one moment, the show understood how to write captivating plots, and actually built upon its source material rather than shit on it.
We're in a crypt. Nobody thought of that. He's bringing all the dead people back to life, and they put the women and children in a crypt with all the dead people. So, rah. Tyrion is smart, but I guess not that smart.
Well, that's my list. I hope you guys enjoyed this content, and I'm looking forward to doing some more Game of Thrones videos in the future, especially once the new show comes out. Let me know what moments you enjoyed from the show, and what you're looking forward to in the House of the Dragon. Hopefully we'll get more moments like these, rather than, you know. I, Kino, first of my name, Lord of the Soprano Reviews and Protector of the Channel, do hereby name the following patrons: Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, Russell, Sean, Graham, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, Conchok Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, Daz J. Kit, Conan Higgins, Elizabeth Ellis, Irish Nachos, Sharose, Greg Penna, Stephen Lillard, Rex Lee, Virtua Fig, Sam Cedarlin, Sandy Wren, Legendary Matt 93, and Don Lucania.